The cowboy saw the girl being dragged by her hair. He rode in and took her with her. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren land. Jack rode through the dry plains, his horse's hooves thudding softly on the parched earth. The air was thick with dust, swirling around him in lazy gusts as he made his way back to town. He didn't mind the solitude. The quiet was something he had grown used to over the years, living life by the rules he set for himself, keeping his distance from people and their problems. Jack was the kind of man who didn't ask questions. He had his reasons for keeping to himself, and they had nothing to do with anyone else. He wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't a man who went looking for conversation. He had learned long ago that the less you talked, the less trouble you found. His horse, a sturdy mare named Sadie. Jack had grown fond of Sadie over the years. She was strong and dependable, much like him. They had been through many miles together, traveling from town to town, finding work where they could. Jack wasn't the type to settle in one place for too long. He wasn't looking for a home, he was just passing through. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting the world in a soft orange glow, when Jack noticed something strange in the distance. A commotion, a swirl of dust rising high into the air. His instincts kicked in, and he slowed Sadie's pace, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of the scene. It wasn't uncommon to see someone out here in the wilderness, but something about the way the figures moved caught his attention. Jack leaned forward, squinting. His gaze fixed on a figure, a young woman. She was being dragged through the dirt by two rough-looking men, their hands gripping her by the hair. The girl's face was twisted in pain as she struggled, but she couldn't break free. Her clothes were torn, and her wild, unkempt hair hung like a curtain over her face. Jack's heart quickened as he watched them. The men weren't just holding her. They were pulling her, moving toward a distant patch of woods where they could do whatever they pleased without anyone seeing. Jack didn't need to guess what they had in mind. He had seen this kind of thing before. The girl was in trouble, and there was no one around to help her. A sense of urgency gripped him. He had seen enough in his years to recognize danger when he saw it. He knew he couldn't let this go on. Without hesitation, Jack kicked his heels into Sadie's sides, urging her forward. The horse responded, picking up speed as they closed the distance between them and the two men. The rough men didn't notice him at first. They were too focused on their victim, too sure of their position, to realize that someone was about to put a stop to it. But as Jack approached, the sound of his horse's hooves grew louder, and the men turned. Their eyes locked on him, and for a split second they hesitated. Jack's hand rested on the handle of his revolver, but he didn't draw it yet. He had no intention of starting a fight if he didn't have to. His voice was low, firm as he spoke, his eyes steady. "Let her go." One of the men sneered, letting out a rough laugh. "You want to make something of it, cowboy?" he said, pulling at the girl's hair, making her wince. Jack didn't flinch. He sat tall in the saddle, his gaze never wavering. "I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. Let her go." The second man looked at his partner, his hand inching toward the knife strapped to his side. Jack could feel the tension building. It wouldn't take much to escalate things, but he wasn't looking for a fight. He just needed the girl to be free. The first man gritted his teeth. "You think you can take us both, cowboy?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. His hand was already on his gun, slowly drawing it from its holster. The sound of the revolver clicking into place echoed in the still air. The men froze. They weren't used to facing someone who didn't back down. The girl, still on the ground, looked up at Jack with wide, fearful eyes. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. She was too afraid, too trapped in the situation to say anything at all. Jack glanced at her for a moment, his expression softening ever so slightly. She was just a girl, no older than a teenager maybe, and she didn't deserve this. "You've got one chance," Jack said, his voice cold but calm. "Get out of here or things are going to get ugly for you." The men looked at each other, their eyes flicking nervously toward the revolver Jack held. Jack's stance was steady, his hand never shaking, his eyes sharp. They had the look of men who knew when to pick a fight and when to back down. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds before the first man growled in frustration and shoved the girl to the ground. "We don't need this," the man muttered, and without another word both men turned and started to back away, their hands raised in a sign of surrender. Jack didn't lower his gun until they were well out of sight, retreating toward the horizon like the cowards they were. He watched them go, his hand still gripping the revolver, ready to act if they decided to come back. But they didn't. They were gone, and the girl was safe, for now. She was sitting on the ground, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Her eyes were wide with fear, but something else was there too, a kind of relief. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at him, as if unsure whether she could trust him. Jack didn't move. He didn't need to. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. The girl nodded slowly, her chest heaving with quiet sobs. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming. She was shaken, exhausted and frightened, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. Jack dismounted from Sadie, moving toward her slowly. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded again, her hands trembling as she pushed herself to her feet. Jack reached out, offering his hand to help her up. She hesitated at first, her eyes flickering from his hand to his face, but after a moment she took it, and he gently pulled her to her feet. She swayed slightly but steadied herself. "I'm Jack," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "You're safe now." The girl didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, as if unsure of what to say. Jack waited, giving her time. He didn't need to rush things. After a moment she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her words choked with emotion. I thought they were going to..." Jack didn't need her to finish. He could hear the fear in her voice, and he understood. He had seen too much of the same thing in his years on the road. But it was over now, and that was all that mattered. Jack didn't offer any more words. He simply turned and walked toward his horse, Sadie patiently waiting for him. "Let's get you out of here," he said as he mounted, offering her the reins. "We'll figure out where to go from here." The girl hesitated for a moment, but then climbed up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Jack urged Sadie forward, and they rode off into the fading light of the day, heading toward the unknown, but with one thing certain: the girl was safe, for now. The sun had long set by the time Jack and Lily reached the small town. The journey had been quiet, the only sound being the steady rhythm of Sadie's hooves as they trotted along the dirt road. Jack didn't speak much, and Lily didn't ask any questions. It was clear she wasn't ready to share her story yet, and Jack wasn't the kind of man to press for details. He knew how to read a person, knew when silence was the better answer. As they approached the town, Jack's eyes scanned the horizon. This wasn't a place he would normally stop, but tonight, things were different. There was no time to head back to the larger towns further down the trail. He needed to get Lily to safety first. The town was small, a dusty collection of buildings, a few lanterns flickering in the windows of some homes, but it was the kind of place where news traveled fast. It wouldn't be long before people noticed the girl's arrival, but Jack figured they had a few hours before the real trouble would catch up with them. They rode through the main street, passing a few locals who glanced up as they went by. It was late, and most people had already turned in for the night, but Jack wasn't taking any chances. He needed to find someone who could help. "Where do we go now?" Lily's voice was soft, breaking the silence between them. She spoke as though unsure of her own words, as though asking for help was something unfamiliar to her. Jack didn't answer immediately. He steered Sadie toward a small, dimly lit saloon at the end of the street. The place looked quiet, almost closed for the night, but Jack had an old friend who ran it. Molly was someone Jack trusted, someone who had helped him out of a few tight spots over the years. He wasn't sure how much Molly knew about what was going on in the town, but he knew she wouldn't ask too many questions, and that was exactly what they needed right now. Jack pulled the reins to a stop in front of the saloon and dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Lily followed his lead, but she didn't move as confidently. Her eyes were downcast, and she seemed lost in her thoughts. Jack could see the weight of her past hanging heavily on her, even though she had only just met him. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. Lily nodded but didn't speak. Jack walked toward the saloon doors, pushing them open with a creak. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke. A few patrons sat hunched over their drinks at the bar, talking in low murmurs. Behind the bar, Molly stood wiping down a glass, her eyes bright and alert as she looked up at Jack's entrance.
"Well, well, look who it is," Molly said, her voice warm but with a knowing edge.
"Been a long time, Jack. What brings you to this part of the world?" "I need a favor, Molly. Got a girl here who needs help." Molly's eyes flickered to Lily, who stood hesitantly by the door, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Jack could see Molly's expression soften. She didn't ask any questions, just turned to a nearby table and gestured for them to sit. "Take a seat," Molly said gently. "I'll get us something to drink." Lily hesitated but followed Jack to the table, sitting across from him in silence. Jack could see that she was still unsettled, still on edge from everything that had happened. The journey, the encounter with the two men, and now the strange new surroundings. It was all too much for someone so young. Jack could only imagine how lost she must have felt. Molly returned a few moments later, setting down a glass of water in front of each of them. Jack took a sip, grateful for the refreshing coolness. Lily just stared at the water, her fingers nervously tapping the edge of the glass. Jack didn't press her to speak. He knew she wasn't ready. After a long moment, Jack spoke. "We need to lay low for a bit. Let things settle down. Can you keep her here for the night?" "Of course," she said. "We'll keep things quiet." "I'll make sure no one bothers her." Jack nodded, satisfied. "Thanks, Molly. I owe you one." Molly waved him off. "Don't mention it. You've done enough for me over the years. Just get some rest. It's been a long ride for you both." Lily finally looked up at Jack, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's going to happen now?" Jack leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "We'll figure it out tomorrow," he said. "For now, you're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." Lily nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Jack couldn't ignore. She had been through something deep and painful. But Jack wasn't sure what it was yet. He wouldn't ask now, but he would find out. Everyone had a story, and eventually Lily would tell hers. The hours passed quietly in the saloon. The patrons, mostly regulars, didn't pay much attention to Jack and Lily. Jack knew the people in this town. Most of them kept to themselves, and they weren't the type to spread rumors about a stranger and a girl who needed help. That was the kind of thing that could get messy in the wrong town, but this wasn't that kind of place. Here, people minded their own business. As the night grew later, Jack stood up from the table, stretching his arms and preparing to head out. He wasn't planning on leaving Lily alone, but he knew she needed time to rest. "I'll be back first thing in the morning," he said to Molly, who was busy cleaning up behind the bar. "No need to worry, Jack," Molly replied with a reassuring smile. "I'll make sure she's taken care of." Jack turned to Lily, who had her head down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words weren't coming. Jack paused for a moment, then walked over to her. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering her a silent reassurance. "You're safe here," Jack said softly, his voice steady. "Get some rest." Lily looked up at him then, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something Jack couldn't quite place. She gave a small nod, but it was clear she wasn't ready to let go of her fears just yet. It would take time, but Jack had all the time in the world. For now, the most important thing was that she was out of harm's way. With one last glance, Jack turned and walked out of the saloon, the door swinging shut behind him. The cool night air hit him as he stepped outside. He looked up at the stars, the silence of the night settling around him. There was still a long road ahead, both for him and for Lily. But tonight, at least, she was safe, and that was a start. The next morning, the first light of day broke through the wooden slats of the saloon windows. The light was soft and golden, spilling across the floor in patches. Jack had slept in the stables, his horse Sadie resting quietly next to him. He didn't need much sleep, but he always made sure Sadie was comfortable before he settled in for the night. She was his only real companion, and the bond they shared was one of the few things Jack truly cared about. As he stood up, stretching his stiff muscles, he could hear the faint sounds of activity coming from inside the saloon. Someone was sweeping, the sound of the broom brushing against the wooden floor. Jack knew it was time to go inside and check on Lily. He had promised he would be back in the morning, and he intended to keep that promise. He grabbed his hat and saddled Sadie before heading toward the saloon. As he approached, he could see Molly standing at the bar, chatting quietly with a few locals. They were always up early, starting their day with coffee and talk about the weather or the latest gossip. Jack wasn't interested in either, so he walked past them, heading toward the back where Lily was. Lily was sitting at the same table they had used the night before. She was looking out the window, her face pale and drawn. It was clear that the events of the previous day were still weighing heavily on her. She hadn't said much since they arrived, and Jack didn't expect her to open up just yet, but he couldn't leave her to face everything alone. He walked over and sat down across from her, his eyes studying her closely. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well, but there was something else in her eyes, something Jack couldn't quite put his finger on. A mix of fear and sadness, maybe. Or maybe it was just the uncertainty of being somewhere unfamiliar. "Morning," Jack said softly, breaking the silence. Lily turned to look at him, offering a small, half-hearted smile. "Morning!" Jack nodded, unsure of what to say next. He wasn't one for small talk, but he knew he had to try. "You sleep okay?" Lily glanced down at her hands, her fingers nervously twisting together. "I didn't really sleep," she said quietly. "I don't think I could." Jack wasn't surprised. After everything she had been through, sleep would be the last thing on her mind. But he didn't press her for more details. "It's gonna be okay," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're safe here." Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window again, as if searching for something just beyond the horizon. The quiet stretching between them felt heavy, but Jack didn't mind the silence. Sometimes, silence was all you needed to say everything without saying a word. Finally, Lily spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" He had been asked that question before, though usually in different words by different people. It was always the same, and Jack's answer was always the same, too.
"I don't leave people in the dirt," he said simply. "And you didn't deserve what happened." Lily turned her gaze back to him, studying him carefully.
She seemed to be weighing his words, trying to understand him. She was a smart girl, Jack could tell, and she was strong, even if she didn't see it yet. "I didn't ask for this," she said, almost bitterly. "None of it." Jack leaned back in his chair, looking out the window as well. "None of us ever do. Life has a way of throwing things at you when you least expect it. All we can do is figure out how to handle it when it comes." Lily was quiet for a moment, digesting his words. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted, her voice heavy with uncertainty. Jack thought about it for a moment. He knew exactly what she meant. She was lost, not just physically but emotionally. She had been through something terrible, something that most people couldn't even begin to imagine. But Jack wasn't like most people. He had seen things that made him question the world around him, things that made him walk away from it all. But there was still something in him that wanted to fight for what was right, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. "You've got time to figure it out," Jack said. "For now, you're safe. Don't worry about the rest of it." One thing at a time. Lily didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. Jack knew it would take time for her to trust him completely. Trust wasn't something that came easily for someone who had been through what she had. He didn't expect her to open up right away, but he was willing to give her the space she needed. It wasn't about pushing her to talk. It was about showing her that there was still a way forward. Just then, Molly walked over, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She placed one in front of Jack and the other in front of Lily. "Thought you both could use a little something to start the day," she said with a wink. Jack smiled at Molly, grateful for the small gesture. She had always been good to him, even when things had been tough. "Thanks, Molly," he said. Lily picked up the mug slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she brought it to her lips. Jack watched her closely, noting the way her fingers curled around the warm cup, as if it was the only thing grounding her at the moment. "You don't have to stay here forever," Molly said, her voice soft but matter-of-fact. "You've got time. Get yourself settled, and when you're ready, we'll figure out the next step." She just sipped her coffee and stared at the table, her brow furrowed in thought. Jack knew that Molly was right. There was no rush. They would have to keep moving eventually, but for now they could take their time. No one was looking for them here, at least not yet. After a few moments, Lily finally spoke, her voice more certain than before. "I don't know what my next step is, but I'm not going back." "I can't." Jack nodded, understanding what she meant. "Then you keep moving forward," he said, his voice calm and steady. "One step at a time!" Lily seemed to take some comfort in that. For the first time since they'd arrived, she sat up straighter in her chair. Jack could see the wheels turning in her mind. She wasn't giving up, even though it had to feel like the world was against her. After a long pause, she looked at Jack, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Jack's heart softened just a little, though he tried not to show it. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just take care of yourself." Molly had been standing nearby, watching the exchange between them with a knowing look. She gave Jack a small nod and walked away, leaving them to their quiet moment.
Jack finished his coffee and stood up, motioning for Lily to do the same.
"We'll figure out where to go from here. You don't have to decide everything all at once." Lily nodded again, more confidently this time. She stood up, her hands still a little shaky, but there was something different in her posture. Maybe it was the weight of the uncertainty lifting, or maybe it was just the reassurance that, for now, she wasn't alone. "Let's get moving," Jack said. "One step at a time." Lily followed Jack toward the door, her eyes focused ahead. She wasn't sure where the road would take her, but for the first time in a long while she felt like she could face it, and that was a start. The next few days in the small town were calm, almost too calm. Jack and Lily spent most of their time keeping a low profile. Jack didn't want to risk drawing attention, not yet. He knew they couldn't stay in one place forever, but for the time being, they had a little peace. That was more than either of them had been able to claim for a while. Jack spent his mornings riding out to check the area around town. He wasn't worried about danger, at least not yet. The gang that had pursued Lily was far behind, and there were no signs of them following. Jack was good at staying under the radar. He had learned long ago how to be discreet. He knew how to watch for threats without ever letting them see him coming. By the time he returned, the sun was high, casting a warm glow over the town's main street. Jack found Lily sitting outside Molly's saloon, watching the world go by. She looked a little more relaxed, though still wary. Her posture wasn't as tense as it had been, and the haunted look in her eyes had softened slightly. But Jack could tell there was more going on in her mind. She wasn't the kind of person who easily let go of things, and the weight of her past still hung heavily on her. He approached her slowly, his footsteps quiet on the dusty ground. "How's it going?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. He didn't want to pressure her, just wanted to offer a little companionship. Lily looked up and gave him a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's quiet," she said softly. "I'm not used to this calm." Jack sat down beside her, his gaze following hers as she stared out at the town. "I know. It's different, isn't it?" he said. "Most places are loud. They're full of people rushing around, always something to do. But here, everything moves slower." Lily nodded, but Jack could see that her mind was somewhere else.
She wasn't really looking at the town. She was looking at something much farther away. Something from her past. Jack wasn't going to ask her about it. He could see it in the way she looked at the horizon, like she was trying to leave something behind, something that was still chasing her. After a long pause, Lily spoke again, her voice quieter than before.
"I don't know where to go from here, Jack," she admitted. "I don't know how to start over."
"You don't have to figure it all out today," he said. "It'll take time, and that's okay. No one has all the answers right away." Lily glanced at him, meeting his eyes for the first time that morning. There was a question in her eyes, something she wanted to ask but didn't know how. Jack knew the look. It was the same one he'd seen in countless people over the years. The look that said they were searching for something but weren't sure if they were ready to find it.
Do you ever feel like you're just running from everything? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
Jack thought for a moment. He knew what she meant. He had felt that way once, maybe still did on some level. "Sometimes," he said slowly.
"But you can't run forever. At some point, you have to stop and face things. You have to decide whether you're going to keep running or if you're going to fight for something worth having."
Lily seemed to take his words in, her expression unreadable. She didn't respond right away, but Jack could see her thinking. It wasn't easy, and Jack wasn't about to pretend that it was.
But he knew that everyone had a choice, even when it didn't seem like it. The days began to blend together in the small town.
Jack's routine didn't change much. He checked the area each morning, watched over Lily in the afternoons, and spent his nights sitting in silence, letting the quiet of the town seep into him.
Lily, on the other hand, spent more time at Molly's saloon helping out when she could. She seemed to find comfort in the routine of things.
At least here, in this small town, she wasn't running anymore. She could breathe a little easier.
But Jack knew that this peace couldn't last forever. They both knew that.
Every day that passed without trouble was another day they could prepare for what might come next. Jack didn't want to be the one to rush Lily's healing process, but he also knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. They needed to keep moving, even if that meant leaving behind the small semblance of safety they had found. One afternoon, as Jack was making his way back to the saloon after a ride, he noticed something different.
There was a man standing near the front door, talking to Molly. The man looked out of place in the quiet town. He was dressed in a way that made him stand out, too polished, too clean for a place like this. Jack narrowed his eyes as he approached. Molly was leaning against the door frame, smiling, but there was something guarded in her expression. The man was talking, but Molly's eyes kept flicking toward the street as if she were expecting someone or something. Jack slowed his pace, his instincts kicking in. Something about this didn't feel right. He wasn't the kind of man who made assumptions, but there was a cold, calculating air about this stranger. It was the way he held himself, as though he had power in this town, even if he didn't yet know what to do with it. Jack approached slowly, making sure to keep his steps quiet. Molly noticed him and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes briefly flashing to the stranger before she turned back to him.
"Jack!"
Molly greeted him casually, though her voice had a touch of tension.
"This is Mr. Mitchell."
"He's passing through, just asking some questions about the area." Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving the man. "What kind of questions?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Mitchell smiled, though there was something forced about it.
"Just the usual," he said smoothly. "Looking for someone, thought you might have seen her."
Jack didn't flinch, but his mind was racing.
"Who are you looking for?"
he asked, keeping his tone calm, trying not to reveal too much.
"Name's Lily,"
Mitchell said, his eyes darting toward the saloon.
"She's a runaway. We've been trying to track her down."
Jack's heart skipped a beat, though he didn't show it. He'd known this moment would come eventually, but it didn't make it any easier. He looked at Molly, who was suddenly very still, her face betraying a hint of worry.
"Can't say I've seen anyone by that name," Jack said, his voice even. "Might want to check the next town over."
Lots of folks passing through. Mitchell didn't seem to buy it, but he didn't push further.
"I might just do that,"
he said, his smile still in place.
Thanks for the help.
Jack watched the man walk away, his thoughts churning. He didn't need to ask more questions. It was clear who Mitchell was after, and it wasn't just a casual search. This was trouble, and it was closer than Jack had hoped. As soon as the man disappeared down the street, Jack turned to Molly, his expression hardening.
You need to get Lily out of here. Now!
Molly's face tightened, but she nodded.
I know. But she's not ready, Jack.
She's still trying to figure everything out. Jack wasn't in the mood for explanations.
She doesn't have time to figure it out. He's looking for her, and we can't let him find her here.
Molly hesitated, then nodded again.
I'll talk to her.
But we need a plan. Jack's eyes met hers, a silent understanding passing between them. They didn't have much time. The clock was ticking, and things were about to change. The following days passed in a haze of quiet urgency. Jack knew that time was running out.
The man who had been looking for Lily was still in town, though Jack hadn't seen him again. It didn't matter.
Jack was sure that Mitchell wouldn't stop searching until he found what he was after. Jack spent his mornings keeping an eye on the town, watching for any sign of trouble. He had been through this kind of thing before, having to stay one step ahead, always looking over his shoulder, never knowing when the next danger would come. But this time, it wasn't just his own skin he had to worry about. It was Lily's. He hadn't seen her much since the man had come to town. Molly had taken her aside, speaking with her privately, but Jack knew that Lily wasn't ready to leave. She still hadn't made up her mind about what she wanted to do, and Jack wasn't going to push her. He knew that the decision had to come from her, not from him. But as the days wore on, it became harder to ignore the growing sense of unease. Jack could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Every time he rode through town, he half expected to see Mitchell, or worse, a whole group of men coming for Lily. He couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the streets began to empty, Jack found himself standing outside the saloon, staring out at the horizon. His thoughts were a jumble of uncertainty and determination. He didn't know what the next step was, but he did know one thing. He couldn't let Lily go back to whatever life she had been running from. The door to the saloon creaked open behind him, and Jack turned to find Molly standing there, her expression serious. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him for a moment, as if weighing her words.
I talked to Lily,
Molly said finally, her voice low.
She's scared, Jack. I can see it in her eyes. She doesn't know if she's ready to leave everything behind, even after everything that's happened.
Jack nodded, his jaw tightening.
I know, he said, but she doesn't have much of a choice anymore.
We can't stay here forever. That man's looking for her, and he's not going to stop.
Molly hesitated, and then she stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. I'm not so sure it's just Mitchell.
I overheard something in town. There are more people asking about her.
People from her past.
He knew this was coming, but hearing it made it all feel too real. More people? He repeated, his voice harder now.
Molly nodded.
I don't know who they are, but they're asking questions. They've been watching the roads, and I'm sure they'll start looking here soon.
Jack's mind raced. He couldn't keep running forever. He had to make a choice, and so did Lily.
We can't wait any longer, he said firmly. We need to leave tonight. Molly looked at him, concern etched in her features. Are you sure she's ready for this, Jack? You're asking her to walk away from everything, and she's not sure she can do that.
I know, Jack said, his voice softening. But I don't think she has a choice anymore.
I'm not letting them find her, not if I can help it.
Molly sighed, her gaze moving to the horizon as well. You're right.
I'll talk to her, but you'll have to convince her, Jack. She's only been running for so long.
She has to want to keep running or she'll just stop. Jack nodded, though the weight of what he had to do felt heavier than ever.
Convincing Lily to leave would be harder than anything he'd faced before. But he couldn't do it alone.
Later that evening, as the shadows of the night began to stretch across the town, Jack found Lily sitting outside, her back against the wooden wall of the saloon. She was staring at the ground, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She looked lost, as though she didn't know where to go or what to do next. Jack knew the feeling. He had spent most of his life feeling that way. He walked over to her slowly, his boots soft on the ground. When she heard him, she looked up, her eyes tired but still holding a spark of something. Maybe hope, or maybe just the desire for something better.
You okay?
Jack asked, his voice steady but gentle. Lily gave a small shrug, her lips pressing together in a tight line.
I'm not sure, she said quietly. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can keep running. I don't know if I can ever escape. Jack sat down next to her, his eyes on the horizon as he spoke. I don't know if anyone can ever really escape. Not completely. But you've got a choice now. You can keep running, or you can stand your ground and fight for something different. Lily turned to look at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Fight for what? Jack turned to face her, his gaze steady. Fight for your life. Fight for a future that's not defined by your past. You're not just running from them, you're running towards something better. But you have to decide if it's worth it.
Lily didn't answer right away.
She just stared at him, her eyes searching, as if she were looking for something she couldn't quite name. Jack could see the doubt in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Something that said she was ready, even if she didn't know it yet. After a long pause, Lily spoke again, her voice quieter but more certain. What if I'm not strong enough to face it? What if I can't leave everything behind? You don't have to do it all at once, Jack said gently. One step at a time. You've already made it this far, and you've got me with you. I won't let anything happen to you. Lily looked down at the ground for a moment, her fingers nervously twisting together. Jack could see her thinking, weighing her options. He knew it wasn't easy, but sometimes the hardest decisions were the ones that changed everything. Finally, Lily looked up at him again, her expression more determined this time. Okay, she said softly. I'm ready. I want to keep running, but this time I'm running towards something. Jack's heart lifted slightly, and for the first time in days he felt a sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We'll leave tonight, he said. We'll head out before they start looking for us. Lily nodded, standing up slowly. Where will we go? She asked, her voice still uncertain but filled with a sense of resolve. Jack stood too, his eyes scanning the distance. We'll head south. There's a place not far from here. A town where no one knows us. We can start fresh there. Lily smiled a little, the first real smile Jack had seen from her since they met. I'm not sure where we're going, she said, but I know I don't want to stay here. We'll figure it out together. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They were leaving behind the past, stepping into an uncertain future, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like they had a chance. A real chance. And that was all he could ask for. With one last glance at the town that had offered them a temporary refuge, they walked away, side by side, toward whatever lay ahead. Together!